I've had many different types of managers over my career, all with their quirks, just like I have my own. Some have had a great match for me, and others, well, sometimes it felt like we were from complete different planets or even galaxies. And it has not mattered if it was women or men. But the managers who had a tendency to micromanage, well, they've always been the most challenging for me. I'm Hanna Zaxmy, your leadership coach, and this podcast is your confidence boost in color. Let's go. Many years ago, someone wise told me or said to me that the people you meet who make things difficult for you, that's the ones that makes you really frustrated, they are sent here to teach you something about yourself. Maybe patience, maybe communication, maybe setting boundaries or something else. And there is a lot of truth in that. None of us are perfect, and we can always improve things in how we lead through life and give the other the possibility of benefit of doubt, because we can all have a bad day or rush through things. But those managers who had that bad habit of micromanaging my work, well, that's still my learning curve. And Ben, he was one of those managers. But after spending weeks pulling together a solid set of facts and data, he would always ask me for more. And when I delivered that, he'd ask for even more. It was like this endless ocean of detail that needed to be filled. And much of it, in my view, was completely irrelevant. It just never stopped. By this point, I was in a senior position. In fact, I had more knowledge about the area than Ben did. His strengths were in like more general business management, not in IT, where I was. And he was as well at this point. So I tried to explain that digging for those extra details that wouldn't help solve the problem and was really just a waste of time and money. But the response I received was like, oh, I need a report on this now. To me, it signaled more a complete lack of trust in what I was trying to communicate and in my experience and knowledge, and that he believed that his way was the only way to do it, and that he wasn't interested in other perspectives. And then that meeting came. We had spent 2 hours going through financials, really line by line, detail by detail, everything, how it was broken down to bits and pieces. The final hour we spent with him asking me for details exactly on what every single person in my department did, how much time they spent on specific tasks, and why those tasks were even necessary. I think we had reached like person number 4 or 5 on that list, and that's when I snapped. I pride myself to having a really long fuse. I mean, really long, but at this time, I stood up, walked straight out, and I slammed the conference room door behind me so hard it really echoed down the corridor. It's really rare for me to lose my cool, but that day I really did. I felt I had to make my point. I'm here to run a business and find solutions, not be bogged down in details that don't take us forward. Ben and I never really found a good working rhythm. And a few months later, the organization changed, and woohoo, he was no longer my manager. I was really thankful for that. 2 years later, something that I had an assignment in a training program. I was to interview different managers about how they create meetings where employees really genuinely feel listened to. That I should interview both those that will set the good examples and at least one that didn't hit that target. And I thought, why not include Ben as one of those examples? So I asked him, and to my surprise, he actually was happy to be interviewed. I went into that meeting with rather mixed feelings, but it turned out to be one of those most eye-opening conversation I ever had. In fact, it's still in my top 10 most memorable conversations because when I asked my questions, open, curious, from different angles and perspectives, something I could never have guessed came out. Ben told me he had often went into one-to-ones with a feeling of not being knowledgeable enough. That fear had grown as he moved into bigger and bigger roles. He feared coming across as uninformed despite his seniority. So his strategy was to fire off as many questions as possible to cover that up. His focus was actually more on protecting himself than on the person he was meeting with. And there I was, 2 years after our stormy history, thinking of if I only knew back then what a difference that could have made. And that was the day I truly understood the power of asking different kinds of questions, not just answering the ones I'm given, but also asking my own in return. And also, I repeated for myself that holding on to the assumption and the intention that everyone acts from a positive intention, even when it doesn't feel that way in that moment. Can you relate? Maybe you've also had that manager like Ben, or have actually, someone who's drives you up the wall with their micromanaging or seeming unwillingness to listen. Today's topic, as you might have guessed, is about asking curious questions and not just being good at phrasing them, but being aware of the intention you bring when you ask them. Because a question can open a door to understanding, collaboration, and trust, but it can also create defensiveness, uncertainty, and distance. It's depending on how and why you ask it. And yes, that little word, why. Such a brilliant question. Simple, easy, but it's also as volatile as dynamite. It can ignite very quickly. So whether you lead a team, run projects, or simply wants to understand people better, you're going to leave this episode with tools that can help you to ask questions that not only get answers, but open new perspectives. Right now, we are already at episode 17. Woohoo! And my intentions with this podcast is that you can take what you hear here and apply it straight into your daily life. That is, should be that easy and simple, so you can get value from the time you invest in listening right away. Because the better you lead yourself and others, the more results you create and contribute with. And like that ripple effect on the water. And I believe it will also bring more joy and color into your life. So I urge you to try out whatever idea comes to you from this episode, because otherwise it's just information. So let's dive into one of my client stories that are on the similar topic. Right now, I'm thinking about the client I worked with, and let's call her Sarah. She was rather frustrated with her manager. She felt that she wasn't being understood and that her manager, much like my Ben, was constantly down in the weeds, controlling the details. Whenever she tried to explain her point of view, it felt like though she were talking past each other. In one of our coaching sessions, we picked up a specific situation where Sarah had met her manager at a meeting, and it hadn't delivered the outcome she wanted. So Sarah looked at it from a different angle, and she realized something important, that she often went into those meetings with the goal of persuading rather than understanding. a bit like Sarah carefully wrapping a beautiful gift for her manager, taking the time to make it attractive, clear, and easy to receive. But when she handed it over to him and he got that gift, he didn't know how to open it. And the content, the message itself, never really got seen or heard. So we tried something new. She prepared 3 completely open, curious questions for the next meeting. Questions she genuinely wanted his perspective on. Like, what's the most important for you that we achieve in this project? What information would help you to feel confident that we are on the right track? And she also took these easy follow-up questions like, oh, that's interesting. Can you tell me more? Can you give me an example? And when she came back the following week, she looked almost surprised. She told me that the meeting had been like completely different from the other ones. She'd heard things she never had insight in before about the priorities, the pressure he was under from the senior leadership, and why certain decisions were being made. And in the middle of all of that, she realized that much of his behavior wasn't about not understanding her. It was about him feeling insecure and needing reassurance. So by asking curious questions, Sarah not only got the understanding she'd been missing, she also created a much better dialogue with the manager. And perhaps most importantly, she felt that they were finally on the same side. I think it was 3 months later. Then she said, oh, I actually have spent so much less time on producing stuff and more focusing on asking curious questions when I get a new task now. I don't rush ahead, just take things for granted like I used to. And the time I spent, I win back so much easier. It's like several times over. Now I can use half the time I produce the material, and my manager feels reassured that he gets what he needs. It's amazing how small conscious choices in the middle of everyday life can make such a difference. So let me ask you, what's the one small thing you could invest in that might save you both time and energy? Let's bring it more back to you. Think about a conversation you recently have that didn't give you the outcome you wanted, or maybe one where you felt that you weren't truly listened to. Be curious about what you brought into that conversation. What intention or expectation did you have before it started? And what were you actually listening for? The truth is, the only person you and I can control is ourselves. And yes, that's definitely not easy. I fully agree on that. But if we put our full focus on the things we can't control, it only leads to more frustration and often no real change in the outcome. So instead, I turn the question back to myself, and I invite you to do the same. Before you go into your next meeting, pause and reflect. From what perspective am I entering into this conversation? And what's my intention? This will help you to clarify your focus, to ensure what you know where it is. Is it your perspective about confirming your own view? Is it about being right? Or is it about genuinely understanding the other person's reality? And intention, that is the underlying purpose. So next time you're about to step into a conversation, ask yourself those 2 questions. What perspective do I want to choose here? And what intention will guide my questions this time? And how do I want to listen? To make it really effectful, also reflect on it afterwards. What have you learned? What could you do a little different next time? Is it check what was the intention that might needs to shift, or is it the perspective that needs to change? And that makes the difference, and why it's so crucial to be aware of it. The how you actually build the skill to shift perspective, to ask better questions, to read the responses. And that's something you can practice and develop over time. As a coach, I help clients with that exactly. And just like Sarah. And I can help you too. If you want to improve your way, how you lead yourself, your team, and your life, because the better you are leading yourself, the bigger ripple effect you create. So both my experience with Ben and from Sarah's story, it shows me something, that it's so easy to get stuck in our own assumptions about why someone is behaving the way they are. But when we pause and choose our perspective consciously and go in with like curious intention, completely new possibility might open. A question is never just a question. It's like a kind of gift, a package you can hand to the other person. If you choose the content with care and make it easy to open, it can build like bridges and create genuine understanding. But if the package is hard to open and it's not clear that it's even a gift, it might be left unopened. And I want to circle back to the word why again. As I said, it's a brilliant, short, simple, but it's also a dynamite. It can so easily be taken as a critical or confrontational, especially if the other person is stressed, in a rush, or maybe running low on blood sugar. It can ignite very quickly. So choose your moments with care when you use the word why. And if in doubt, reframe it a bit into something a bit softer, like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. Can you give me an example? We're now coming into the end of this episode for today. And as I said in the beginning, my intention is that you can take what you hear here at the podcast and apply it straight into your daily life. I want you to get value from the time you invest in listening right away. So here's my curious question for you. What's the first test you'll try after this episode, based on what you heard today? Did something pop into your mind as you were listening? If so, write it in the comments. I love to hear. And I also want to cheer you on. And here's the bonus. When you share it with someone else, you make yourself much more accountable to actually do it. And that's a great way to dare to test something new. If you haven't yet started following this podcast, I encourage you to do so. Every week I release a new episode to give you a confidence boost. How to get in touch with me and access free resources is all in the show notes. So see you in a week. Until then, be confident. Inside